Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this fourth technical session of Arogya Month 3.2. We have a very interesting and a very important topic. How do we cover the low-income groups or the middle-income groups into the health insurance or the health coverage financial risk protection fold? They are neither too poor, they are neither poor or disadvantaged to be covered by government schemes, nor are they so rich or maybe comfortably placed to buy private covers. And their affordability after a pandemic has still further come down. So what are there any solutions? Are there any possibilities that we could have a public-private partnership under the leadership of NHA or PMJ platform to bring them into the fold of coverage, health coverage? And the second important topic that we will be discussing will be about coverage of schemes. There are various schemes, multiple schemes of different kinds, government, blue collar workers, or armed forces. Whether there is a possibility, what are the gains to be made if they were all brought on one platform? So these are some of the questions that we would be addressing, and we have a very rich panel of experts who will be sharing their insights and valuable experience. Before we go on to the experts, let me just do a short presentation and introduce the subject that we will be debating about and discussing about. Can we have the presentation, please? Next. So if we look at the put it on a slide mode. Yeah. So if we look at the pie of Indian population, let's say 135 crore people, where do they stand? Where do we stand as a population in terms of health coverage? So let's say approximately the largest circle within the pie belongs to PMJ. 50 crore Indians are being covered. They are the poorest 40%. Additional, the brown, the peach color circle is additional people covered by the states. A lot of states have expanded coverage, like Himachal and many other states, and that's around 13 to 15 crore people under those schemes. And then there are schemes of the public sector, the central government scheme, or the ESIC for blue collar workers. That could be around 4 crore families, around 15 crore people are covered. Pardon, the diagram is not to the scale, so it may not be actually representing the numbers. And then there is a private insurance coverage of around 14 crore people. So together they make up to around 95 crore people. Now, what happens to the balance of 45 crore people? They are left out. It's not to say that all people who are covered here are covered for exactly the same coverage. There may be quite inequity in their coverage. Some may be covered for a very minuscule portion of tertiary care only, like in state schemes, and some may be covered, for all encompassing, everything included, like the CGHS scheme. But let's say they have some kind of a fallback mechanism for health expenses. Next, please. So let's dig a little deeper. That who are these 45 crore Indians who are left, without coverage? So if you look at this NSSO survey, then on the left side, the first two quintiles, the poorest 20% and the next 20%, the survey indicates that 90% of them they do not have any financial protection against health expenses. The next two quintiles also are not so better off. The ratios just marginally improving by 80 to 84%. I mean, they don't have, so around 8% improvement over the previous one. And the last one, which we call as the richest 20% Indians, they also don't have financial protection. Around 72% of them don't have a financial protection. But in their case, in the rightmost quintile, we are less worried because we assume that they would have resources. They would not be pushed to poverty. But these middle two quintiles are a cause of concern for every policymaker, because they are left on their own to fend for themselves. The numbers between the previous slide and this slide may be a few crores plus and minus because of the difference in data periods. But more or less the picture is the same, that poorest are being covered by the government schemes. The richest, either they may have private insurance or they may have resources to fend for themselves. But the middle two, some of them may have some coverage. It's not that exactly they don't have coverage, but most of them, majority of them, don't have a coverage. Next, please. So why don't these people, and why can't they buy cover? Why? What stops them, or what's enabling or disabling factor? Why don't they buy cover? First of all, I think most of them find the health insurance products of private players of the private market quite expensive. And the coverage is not that great. There are pre-existing exclusions, waiting periods, sublimits, co-pays. So the coverage for the value for money, they don't find value for money. Lack of awareness, of course, as a nation, or maybe it's a question of a financial literacy or the awareness about risk mitigation measures. They are not aware of those. And then, of course, there is a huge anti-selection because our insurance pie is so small. I mean, 14 crore compared to 135 crore. So the anti-selection is quite huge in our market. And this segment of Indians is also difficult to reach for the insurance companies because they're mostly in the informal sector. Very few of them will have formal sector, occupations. So as such, and they're spread all over mostly in tier 2 towns and tier 1 and tier 2 towns away from metros. So it's a very difficult to reach segment. And then for the insurance companies, the high claims cost and high operating expenses, some of them don't have high claims cost. Some of the new players, the standalone health insurance companies, but they have very huge management expenses. And the other side, the public sector insurance companies have very high claims cost. So overall, the picture becomes that these people they cannot buy, they are not able to reach, the distribution of insurance doesn't reach them, and the products are not very attractive value for money for them in a way. Next, please. So keeping this in mind, we at NHA, we evolved a project called Insurance Pilots covering the missing middle. It was unveiled last year, and whereby the target is to cover the uncovered low-income population, either in formal or informal sector. And they could be belonging to some affinity groups, some NGOs or self-help groups, trade associations or cooperative members, because the intent is not to offer this kind of a cover on a individual basis. That would be too skewed in coverage, and that may lead to huge anti-selection. So the group covers to avoid anti-selection, to offer them a PMJ clone product by the commercial insurance companies on voluntary basis. There is no compulsion either for the groups or for the insurance companies. It's on mutually agreed terms. But we assume that using this platform of PMJ, offering a product like PMJ, would definitely lead to a more affordable cover, and whereby it could help the insurance companies to have greater penetration into this segment of the market, and for more people under this segment to be covered. Presently, the 21, we had a huge response to this project, and almost every insurance company applied who was eligible, and 21 insurance companies have been shortlisted. The second part of our discussion relates to how there are, on the other side, that was on the private insurance side, on the side of the health assurance schemes like PMJ is there, employee state insurance, which is the blue collar workers, 13 crore people are covered, or CGHS or central armed forces are there, railways are there. There are different risk pools of their own, and they are fragmented. They are being managed by their own administrators using their own terms and conditions, using their own technology. So is there a benefit to be achieved by bringing them all together in one platform? We are not saying harmonizing their cover, because their cover may be different. But in effect, healthcare or the utilization of services or the procedures are the same, or the hospitals servicing those beneficiaries are the same. So that's the second part of this part of the discussion that we wish to have. Next, please. So, and why do we want to kind of bring these schemes together? Because, as I said, there is a lot of duplication of resources. There is low efficiency, and there is using missed opportunity for collective bargaining, because everyone is having their own network of hospitals which could be from labs to the tertiary care hospitals. The terms and conditions and the contracting is very different. So there is no risk pooling of any kind. And of course, there is some inequity also. There's quite a lot of inequity across the schemes also. Next, please. So under this convergence project, we have launched, presently launched 3 or 4 schemes on the platform of PMJ. One is the CGHS scheme, which was launched very recently. I think 1st of June it got launched. And we have now empaneled CGHS hospitals onto PMJ platform. And 5 lakh treatments have been facilitated quite early. CAPF is for the Central Armed Police Forces, which are there all over the country for the internal security. And the pilot is going on in Assam. ESIC is the employee state insurance for the blue collar worker. It's been activated in 150 plus districts. Plus, there are some schemes of the Ministry of Health which were running to help the beneficiary at the time of need, special dispensation funds, and they are also being brought onto the PMJ platform. And the last is the building and construction workers who are there all over India. If they can, and they're all governed by one board, and if they can be brought onto the same platform where PMJY is running. So next, please. So I think what's the target of this pooling? What is it that we're trying to achieve from this kind of diversity pooling? There is a PMJ, NHA, NDHM platform. Let's say that is the platform in which NHA is built. It's a kind of a public good or a public infrastructure, so to say, created by NHA, and which comprises of a very robust IT platform, a hospital network, standard data and packages, standard treatment guidelines, real-time monitoring dashboards. Because the scheme is paperless, so there is definitely gives us an advantage of being totally paperless and real-time monitoring. It is portable. And now with NDHM coming, this is, we are working on every transaction and every record being interoperable also. So there is a huge advantage of pooling this diversity onto the NHA platform, onto the platform of PMJ. Now, the schemes above, the boxes above, they may not be uniform in their coverage or in the benefit scheme, or some may be funded by the government, some may be contributory, some may be totally funded, self-paid, but it helps to bring them all together for purpose of many advantages that we gain out of this. Next, please. So what do we gain out of this? So naturally, the volume of PMJ, like we are already, most people are aware that 2 crore plus transactions have already been handled. My pardon, I'm using the words 2 crore, so crores and not billions. So 20 million transactions have already happened on NHA platform, and they are all, that brings us so much of efficiency of standardization. We are able to standardize so many things, like the packages, exclusion, inclusions, the costing, the standard treatment guidelines. We have introduced from last 1 year, I think this January onwards, we have introduced standard treatment guidelines and protocols, clinical pathways. This is a totally digital platform, which definitely makes it much more efficient. As I mentioned, the operating expenses of the insurance companies are huge and brings greater economies. Strategic purchasing, when you pool purchasing power, that definitely gives you more power to purchase from the providers. But of course, this doesn't mean that the providers have to work at one cost. Within the schemes, there may be different level of pricing of the hospital, because there are different segments of population. One may be in ward and one may be in a single room. And pooled capacities, like there is so much duplication of resources happening because the schemes are being managed by different administrators. So definitely pooled capacities, and it gives you capacity to train the people much faster. And lastly, this effort or these initiatives would definitely give us some evidence for our UHC roadmap. For the balanced population, how would they be covered? What works and what doesn't work? And what is long-term sustainability, and how to bring equity? There is a lot of debate and discussion about the voluntary enrollment into the scheme, and involving private insurance, we would know from these pilots whether these work, they do not work, whether they serve the purpose of bringing affordable insurance, whether they serve the purpose of pool capacities leading to higher economies and efficiencies. So these would be the gains that we hope to achieve, and have some learnings on the way. That's the introductory presentation that I wanted to make as the opening remarks. Now let me invite Shri Alok Saxena. He's as the chair of the session to give his address. Shri Alok Saxena is additional secretary in the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. He's also the Director General for CGHS and NACO. In the ministry, he's looking after PMJ implementation also. And he's a 1989 batch of Indian Postal Service officer, and he has been in various capacities, has rich experience in Ministry of Health, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Tourism. And I now request Alok sir to kindly take over. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Malti. Thank you, Malti ji. Good afternoon, friends. It gives me immense pleasure to be here this afternoon. And in fact, when we sit down to discuss this topic, for a minute, I go back to almost 4 years ago when 5 of us were called by the PMO in November 2017 and asked to implement, and in fact, design, conceptualize, and implement the scheme in shortest time possible. And we were able to do that within 4 months. It is the Prime Minister's vision. It was then, and it continues to be now, that initially it was the 40% of the population of this country, which is extremely deprived, which has no cover. So we, on the one hand, we talk about population which can go below poverty line with one catastrophic expenditure on health. But here was this population which was in catastrophe and which had no access to any kind of resources, and they were dying in the prime of their youth of their life. They were also getting disabilities of various kind, and it was having a huge impact on our economic activity as such, because if populations in the prime are disabled or they're plugged away, this has an adverse impact. Apart from that, health as a public good also remains government's responsibility. Now in this country, it's slightly more complex because constitutionally health is a subject which is with the state. Public health in hospitals is a subject which is with the states. So how do we do that? So when we sat down to design this scheme, incidentally, of the original 5, 2 of us, Dr. Paul and I, still survive in the health sector. Other people have either retired or have moved on. In fact, Mr. Jalani was there yesterday from WHO, though he continues to be in the health, but he's no longer in the government. And Madam Preeti Sudan has retired, and Alok has moved on to state. So 5 of us were there. Now, so when we were designing this and conceptualizing this scheme, the first and most important thing was having consultations with states, bringing them on board, and designing a system which works. Not just that, we also learned from many states which already had their own health assurance and health insurance schemes. We also, Dr. Tandon is here. He also facilitated us studying some other systems globally and how World Bank looks at it. But the final product, which has come to be known as PMJY, remains R and R alone. And we are working, and we are still trying to improve and trying to bring more things. But when we were conceptualizing, it was decided that it will not be in the health ministry. We will have a separate body. That initially was the National Health Agency, and now it's National Health Authority. Also, at that time, it was decided that eventually we are going to move towards a national digital database of health. Aadhaar, as you know in India, the Aadhaar of health. That was the vision, and it also has fructified. And day after, Prime Minister would be inaugurating the Prime Minister National Digital Health Mission, and we'll have a countrywide digital health platform. So these things go hand in hand. Why, I look back before addressing the topic that Mrs. Jaiswal, Dr. Jaiswal has given me, is because this gives us a background as to where we should go. The idea was that we have to eventually provide some kind of a cover to people who do not have. Now, the slide number 3 of Dr. Malti's presentation, which the source was Alok's presentation earlier, gives you the middle 2 quintile, and you say on your left side the 2 quintile are covered by PMJY, and the rightmost, the last 20% is the richest. But again, if we see our experience with the pandemic and with the second wave particularly, was that no matter what resources people had, no matter what accessibility people had, and no matter how influential one was in the city called Delhi, I am a witness to that nothing worked. As Director General of CGHS, I was waking up at nights, all nights, and taking calls and facilitating people's admission in hospitals, facilitating treatments, facilitating oxygen supply. So even that, what I'm trying to say, even that last quintile is not without vulnerabilities, if I put it mildly. So some kind of a cover is required. Now, before I come to how we do that, there are 2 bottom lines that we need to address. One is availability of health infrastructure within 50 miles or 50 kilometers of where one is staying. Now, no matter what you design, if the city where I'm staying does, or the town or on the peri-urban area where I'm staying, doesn't have health infrastructure, all of us will be congregating either to New Delhi or to Mumbai, Kolkata, or to the state capital, maybe like in a state like UP, it could be Varanasi, Kanpur, Lucknow, Noida, but the rest of the city you'll be congregating. The rest of the state you'll be congregating. So that is the first bottom line that we need to address, and it's still work in progress. As I said, it's the public health is state subject, hospitals are state subject. So their government of India has to work hand in hand with the states. And as we know, it's a federation, it's a union of states. So the developments, the growth will be different from state to state. The second thing is medical education, provision of qualified medical professionals. These are doctors, but not only medical doctors, but also allied and health professionals, nurses, people who take care of the system. We saw during the pandemic that some of the bigger hospitals too, when the second wave came and the virus was extremely contagious, who were looking after patients in the wards, day-to-day maintenance functions were performed by these allied health professionals. So that is what we require. So you require physical brick and mortar and technology-enabled hospitals. You also require manpower. So that is a bottom line. Now, coming back to PMJY and then going to the 2 other aspects of how do we cover the rest and how do we converge the schemes. But before that, the issue is that even PMJY takes care of catastrophic expenditure in tertiary and secondary sectors for tertiary and secondary hospitalization. We know, and more than me, other panelists who are there with me, they know that maximum out-of-pocket expenditure happens on primary care, on OPD services, on purchasing drugs and medicines. Now that, even in PMJY, still goes out of pocket, because the other pillar that is envisioned for the Ayushman Bharat umbrella, it has 2 pillars. One is the PMJY, other is 150,000 health and wellness centers, which are to provide care for primary care for routine ailments, also reproductive and child care services, ANCs and screening of the common non-communicable diseases, communicable diseases as well. So though that pillar is strengthened. And that is, from the government side, from the supply side, till that pillar is strengthened, out-of-pocket expenditure and this provision of umbrella through schemes like PMJY will only provide you an umbrella with a big hole. And, you may save some money, but you may still be vulnerable, all the populations. So while big expenditure certainly happens on treatments of diseases and cancers and stuff like that, but day to day, a big dent on your pocket is made by your primary care, your small expenditure on small ailments. But if not taken care in time, they are the ones that balloon into a catastrophic event. So this is the third thing. Now coming back to how do we address? As an additional secretary in the ministry, as Dr. Malti introduced me, I look after NACO, I look after the central government health scheme, Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Plan. So all this, what is the takeaway for me? The takeaway is that the schemes that you make, the populations that are left behind, how do you bring them under the cover, some kind of a cover? These are expensive. These are one size here doesn't fit all, in the sense that the requirements for each population group is different. And originally, if we see why there are still so many verticals in the government, we can see the reason. Railways have a different vertical for their employees. Central government employees, within CGHS, there are two kind of I wouldn't say pillars, but two kind of buckets. One bucket is OPD care, the primary care, which I look after through CGHS dispensaries, and the other is hospitalization. Now, hospitalization for the serving employees is enabled by CGHS, but not taken care of by CGHS. But because serving employees their hospitalization care is taken care of by their own parent employer departments. So what we do, we impanel hospitals, we decide the rules of the game and the package rates. But when a person showing the CGHS card gets himself or herself admitted to a hospital, the expenditure on that is borne by his or her own employer department. So we are enablers, but we do not strictly provide that service. Whereas dispensaries, the wellness centers as we call them, the primary care, the family physicians, they provide free, unlimited consultancy as a family physician, and drugs of medicines of any kind. There is no bar on that. And even if it is new, we have systems and mechanisms to take care of that. We have experts group in various specializations that decide when to introduce new drugs and how. The advantage that we have is that, which is there in all these schemes, is that you are able to do strategic purchasing and bring down the rates. So if this is the issue, here I go to what Dr. Tandon taught me long years ago. How do you strategize big strategic purchase? Now, ideally, 140 billion, 1.4 billion is a huge number for us to purchase strategically. But then strategy also kind of tells me I should not be putting all my eggs in one basket. So there have to be various kind of schemes. PMJY is one, which is our vision is cutting edge healthcare, but no frills. Those who are paying, CGHS is a co-payment scheme where people, not a co-payment ideally, but a contribution-based scheme where the subscribers contribute. So they want frills, and the subscription is also graded. So those who pay more, they want more frills, in the sense of rooms and air conditioning and stuff like that. So, so that can be taken care of. Co-payment in a public health scheme, again, in the beginning, I was telling Dr. Malti that I have some Siddhantic, as in principle, reservations about co-payment. And that is, that co-payments at times lead to corruption and moral hazards and rent-seeking behavior by the service providers. So that is, what we've learned globally, and then, we need to think about it before we start co-payment. But subscriptions can be given. Subscriptions have apart from CGHS, they have a certain limit, and the limitation is that there are certain areas which are no-go. In health insurance, we've seen particularly in the pandemic that at some place the meter stops, at some place the areas are a no-go areas. So how do you take care of that? That remains. So, but it is a good idea. Now, how do we do that? I think under the NHA umbrella, it is eminently doable. It is eminently doable. How do we do that? Once Dr. Sharma, the present CEO of NHA, was explaining it to a minister in a meeting with the Honorable Minister, he said, I visualize my role as creating a dwelling, maybe a complex of dwelling units where people can come and stay. So I prepare on my NHA platform these structures where people can come and stay, which means that they can come and utilize that. So this is what we can do, and we must do under NHA. I'll give you a little example, and then I'll move to my last point. The little example is, as you know, India's flagship airline, that is Air India, is being disinvested. And now, of course, the process is on for quite some time, but now perhaps the time has come that within months it will be disinvested. It will be sold to some private entity. Now, the existing employees of Air India, which is a public sector company, are coming to the government and saying that, okay, you're giving us a severance package, but what about our healthcare? So Ministry of Civil Aviation has been writing to me as DG of CGHS, saying that, can I bring them under CGHS umbrella? Now, as I said, CGHS is a very, very investment intensive scheme. It is, as a civil servant, it is part of my compensation package. I worked in the government for 40 years at a salary which is subpar. Why? Because I know after my retirement, or if I die, my families, my dependents will be taken care of by the government, A, in the form of pension, and B, in the form of healthcare. So it is my deferred wage. So CGHS is a government servant's deferred wage, and it is an expensive proposition. So government, those kind of resources government cannot give to set of people who were not promised this kind of healthcare when they joined. When I joined as a civil servant, it was part of my service condition. And I decided to forego almost 40% of my compensation to get these benefits when I retire or as I get old, or even my dependents in case the government servant passes away. So now, what is the alternative then? We've been telling Ministry of Civil Aviation that no matter what, it would not be possible for Government of India to extend CGHS to the employees of Air India once it is disinvested and taken over by the private entity. I've been telling them repeatedly, and perhaps now time has come, Maltiji, to go to NHA to get a product made for themselves, because Civil Aviation is also telling us, oh, we'll keep a corpus of maybe, some 100 crores, which is like some billion rupees, we'll keep a corpus that can take care of this. So what we are saying, rather than looking at CGHS, which is a difficult proposition, you get a product made for yourself, tailor-made for your people through NHA, and put the corpus there and utilize it. So this is perhaps the way to go for this set of population, the middle 2 quintile, Dr. Malti. This is what I think, that we need to make models, and these should be where you plug and play. They operate, pay, and get it out of it. What we take care, the things that we are taking care in PMJY, your provision of deciding the packages and paneling hospitals, all those kind of things, and moral hazards, frauds, everything that we can take care. So I'll just finish in a minute, Dr. Malti. The last point is that what about the existing government schemes? How do we converge them? Now, as you yourself said, CGHS is a very good example where CGHS remains the way it is and it is reforming itself, but things where NHA could build synergies with its existing systems, we have started doing that. So it is hospital empanelment, it is transaction management, it would be fraud control, it would be data analysis. These are the areas and public grievance redressal where they can converge. And what happens is, and when you are empaneling hospitals, not only for PMJY beneficiaries, but also for a larger set, and you are facilitating procurement of drugs for a larger set, it will, you will accrue benefits through strategic purchasing. This is what I feel. I'm here. I'll continue to chip in. Thank you very much for giving this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Saxena. I think you set the ball right, and you spoke about so many things which are relevant to make it happen for these, for the other segments, and as well as I think you partially also spoke about bringing more efficiencies to the current people who are covered, whether under CGHS or under the other schemes, and to create human resources and infrastructure and subscription models. It's all right that you overstayed the time limit because of the content that you were trying to cover. That's absolutely. I would request my other co-panelists to cooperate and make up for the short time. Now we have to jump the queue a little bit, and we have been and we'll be inviting Dr. who is the MD and CEO of SBI General. He actually has to go. He came in between from a meeting and then for being with the panel. So he is MD and CEO of SBI General Insurance Company, and he's originally from the SBI Bank. He's a banker and he's a master in finance management and economics, and has a rich experience in the banking sector. I request Shri Kanpal to kindly take over. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Malti ma'am. A very good afternoon to all. And thank you to Mr. Alok Saxena, who spoke from the heart. I was literally carried away. See, I'll give little introduction about SBI and then how I got carried away by his speech. That I'll let you know. So SBI General is the outfit which is the joint venture of SBI. SBI, everybody knows, is a banker, but we are into other industries also. So SBI General Insurance writes the non-life insurance, which is there. We are the fastest growing general insurance company, so-called private, but we have public sector mind, and means I tell SBI, only SBI, where 1/3 of the population banks, and the government of India, which has got the entire population's welfare in their hand, these two can increase the penetration of health insurance in the country. Rather, after this, I have to speak to the top management of SBI and talking about the importance of health insurance and how SBI can contribute for penetration in rural, semi-urban areas. So we are a multi-line company. As of now, we offer other various risk coverages also. But since today we are talking about the health insurance and particularly PMJY, I'll talk about this only. Missing middle is definitely in our hearts. Particularly, my heart goes to those people who post-COVID have suffered and they have pushed back to poverty. Their incomes of families are suffering because of the loss of income or because of the expenditure which they incurred during this period on health. So we have from SBI, we are making an effort to utilize our distribution network for reaching out to all those locations where normally we do not see agents and others going there, and talk about, create awareness about this. The first thing is about creating awareness. Second thing is that we are working on how we can design simple, affordable, easy to understand solutions, health solutions. So what rural population requires definitely is a simplicity. You had mentioned, ma'am, in your presentation that why penetration is low, because people find it complex. They do not, there is no awareness creation about this. Rather, as part of industry, we are requesting GI Council also to restart the campaign of talking about importance of the health insurance. As regards PMJAY, wonderful job has been done by NHA. My salute to you all, and it's a human service. And I'm sure that your dream of covering every individual in India through some kind of health protection scheme or health insurance scheme, that will definitely succeed, ma'am. And being SBI person, I assure you whatever best we can do, we will do. As of now, we are writing retail and group, but in PMGAY also, we have participated this time, and we have taken one state, Punjab. We are in the process of investing in backend to manage such large scheme, and I can assure you that we are confident that over next few months we will be able to expand to other states also, and do a better job in providing healthcare protection to the citizens of Punjab state. I'll a little bit touch about the role private insurers can play in covering the missing middle. See, private insurers already were instrumental in expanding the mass health schemes during initial year. If you remember, the weavers, artisans, their schemes where they were covered through the health insurance. Three key parameters of the success for missing middle are the number one is the mass enrollment, where we would require, I think, government support in doing that, and low OPEX model. So we need to invest in technology. I think NHA is already doing that digitization of the process, which is there. Third is, which is very important, is that from the ground level, often people are misguided. So claim abuse, so that needs to be controlled, because if we are able to do that, I think we'll able to cover more and more people and give them better healthcare facilities. Inherently, private insurance players have got strong IT backbones, and all such companies can come together and can ensure that maximum enrollment with the lowest OPEX servicing cost can help lower the premiums and increase the penetration. So, what are the challenges being faced by insurers as of now? The scheme initially involves very high investment, because we need to enroll all the members, their families, and the hospital networks, etc. But if the scheme does not assure us a continuity for at least 3 years, then it becomes very difficult, because the expenditure which we incur in the initial setting up becomes a fixed cost for us. And as I told you, that we are private by mind but public by heart. So we have to, at the end of the day, meet our OPEX expenditure as well as leave something for the other stakeholders, investors, etc. So that's why ultimately, whenever we give a very competitive quote in terms of premium, so we need to ensure that we are given a good platform to play, so that we at the end of the year we can be successful and say that we'll keep servicing these mass with the insurance scheme. So we would love to continue there, because it takes 1 year to set up, to bring discipline, and then it helps. Role of government, I think government is doing a wonderful job. But one more thing which needs to be done is that publicity to encourage better participation, and premium collection remains still a challenge. So how government can help, and how government can help the companies to increase the trust about this whole scheme, because government and private players, still people are little confused about, as you also mentioned, that they do not count the value here. Rather, some of the segments are there where they talk about how this scheme is not beneficial. And I'll just quote one data. 65% of total healthcare expenses are still being borne from out of the pocket. So it means that, see, we need to educate these people. We need to increase penetration and coverage through such schemes. So this is our experience so far. Is not countable because we have just entered, but two, three things which had come to my mind, I have spoken. But this is an opportunity. Missing middle is an opportunity for further insurance penetration for population who are definitely deprived of the insurance facilities, and due to their financial obligations or high medical costs, they require it immensely. We at SBI General, we are exploring opportunities through various mechanisms, our rural semi-urban branches, our point of sale presence, which is in around 70,000 locations, which covers around 210,000 villages. And then we are trying to reach there through the self-help groups in special geographies. So this is our effort. And we assure you that we will continue participating with such missions which the government comes with, and particularly covering the health insurance of health risk of the citizens of India. Thank you, Malti ma'am. I'll stop here because I think I was given 5 minutes. I have exceeded my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kanpal. A lot of things that you have mentioned about mass enrollment and low OPEX and support by the government in creating awareness ring a bell. I've been a public sector employee as well as an insurer, so I think I can correlate to a lot of points that you made. That's for another time. I think thank you very much, and we are happy that you could accommodate. We could also, the other panelists also could accommodate. Switching over. Thank you very much for your valuable
Thank you.
comments.
Thank you. Please permit me to leave this.
Sure.
My team is already joined there, so
Sure.
I'll take my feedback from there. Thank you. Thanks.
Now, I think it is my great privilege to invite Dr. Ajay Tandon to give his inaugural address. Dr. Ajay Tandon is currently lead economist with the World Bank. He has worked in India, Indonesia, Bhutan, Laos, and Philippines. He has received PhD in economics from Virginia Tech. He's worked with the ADB earlier. And his most recent book has been Going Universal, How 24 Countries Are Implementing UHC from the Bottom Up. I think, Dr. Ajay, we are looking forward to your session and to gain from that how these countries have learned and what we have to learn from these countries. Over to you, Dr. Tandon.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Malti. And I also want to begin by saying it's such a privilege and a pleasure to be on the same panel as Mr. Saxena, who I've known now for several years, and also the speaker who's going to come after me, Patrick Osewe. Both of them are close friends and colleagues, and I've learned a lot from interacting with them. I'm just going to make 5 points. I have about 10 minutes to speak, and I thought I'll put them on a slide and a couple of slides. So the 5 points I'm going to just make is that this challenge of the missing middle is very common. It's not just in India, it's very common in countries, in particular countries that use social health insurance or are using social health insurance as a way to get to universal health coverage. The second point, I just want to make a reminder that sometimes what we think is missing middle on paper may actually not be missing middle in reality. The third point is really we have this challenge of the missing middle because it's a challenge of informality, first and foremost. And the fourth point I want to make is that You can raise as much awareness as you want, as much mass enrollment and as much information raising, but global evidence is clear that you need some form of compulsion and subsidization to make progress towards universal health coverage. The key word being universal. You may be able to gain some coverage using information campaigns and going through professional associations, but really global evidence tells you otherwise, and really expanding some form of tax finance non-contributory coverage to the missing middle and delinking the contributions to entitlement are some options that some countries such as India could consider. And I'll just elaborate a little bit on each of these points. So the first point I want to make is the challenge, the missing middle, is really a challenge in countries which are using social health insurance as a health financing system. So if you look at the left-hand side of my slide over here, you actually have countries that don't use social health insurance. They use general tax financing. So you have general taxes, income tax, consumption tax, what have you, that goes to Ministry of Finance, and then a certain portion is allocated to as part of the, so the prepayment there is taxes that's allocated to Ministry of Health that then provides those services or purchases those services. It could be either from a supply side or it could be also from a demand side where it's tax finance coverage. And of course, you may have other sources of financing also in those systems, out of pocket and voluntary health insurance. But really the spine of the system is based around tax financing, and the entitlement is universal. So everybody has access to health services, regardless of their economic status, regardless of what they look like, and whatsoever. And this is the model that you have in Brazil. Brazil has a universal tax financed health system. You have this model in Malaysia. You have this model in our neighboring country of Sri Lanka. You have this model in many high income countries, UK, Portugal, Italy, Greece, Norway, Denmark, Sweden. I can keep going. So these countries, and the reason I'm highlighting this point is also it tells us, gives us a sense of what the solutions might be to the problem. These countries that follow a tax financed health financing system typically will not have the missing middle problem because of the way it's set up. The other set of countries which are using sort of social health insurance financing, it was initially started in Germany in the late 1800s and then later on adopted by Austria, France, and then also by several developing countries, including Indonesia, Vietnam, and Philippines. If you look at the right-hand side, here, your one big difference is that your entitlement to health depends on your contribution, whether you make that contribution or if somebody makes that contribution for you. And usually, so therefore, your entitlement by design is not universal. Typically, the formal sector has a mandatory contribution that they pay. That's like a premium. That's why it's also called social health insurance. And the poor, usually it's, the government pays the premium for you through the taxes. And then you have a group that's the informal sector, which the key issue here is it's very difficult to collect mandatory contributions from the informal sector. And here I'm talking about the non-poor informal sector, not the poor. The poor typically are covered by tax financing. And really that's where you get the missing middle problem, is that the non-poor informal sector gets left out for any reforms related to this because of the difficulty in collecting contributions from this sector. I'll give you two examples here. So the second point I want to make is that the missing middle challenge is really also a challenge of persistent and large levels of informality in the labor market. So I'll give you the example of two countries that are using social health insurance financing. So on the left-hand side, you see South Korea. So South Korea started, it was a sort of the solid orange line is showing you GDP per capita. That's showing you the income level of South Korea. It grew very fast in the past several decades. And it introduced social health insurance in 1997, and by 1989, almost 100% of the population was covered. But a very important point is that as South Korea was implementing and rolling out this coverage, social health insurance, their levels of informality were declining quite rapidly. So these levels of informality are your dotted orange line, and it was a huge decline. And so, that helped them because it was easy for them to collect contributions. And so the coverage for sort of the informal non-poor became less and less. So, it was only the intersection was really the informal poor, which the government covers. But if you look at Indonesia also, they had a bit of a shock in '97 Asian financial crisis. And sort of has had quite dramatic economic growth thereafter. Indonesia introduced its movement towards expanding coverage really following the Asian financial crisis with the health card for the poor in 1997, which in some ways was like PMJ in some ways. It was a tax finance coverage for the poor. And the goal was to expand to universal attainment using contributions and tax financing by 2019. In 2019, they actually didn't get to 100% coverage. They're about 80% coverage. And really the key difference between previous countries like France and South Korea and Japan and others was that levels of informality in Indonesia and in many other countries, including India, over the past couple of decades, have actually not been going down as fast as they had earlier. There's a whole body of literature trying to understand why is informality not going down. So, in Indonesia, even now, about 55% of the economy is informal. The labor force is informal. The numbers for India are even higher. I think it's almost 80% or 70 to 80% is informal. The problem is that they're not, these levels of informality in India and other countries like Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, many other middle income countries are not going down as fast as they were. And many people, argue it's because of burdensome regulations, very high levels of taxation on firms. You might have, in Latin America, there's a whole debate going on that you have so many of these nice social protection schemes for the poor, so there's no incentive to become formal. There's a whole body of work that says, because of globalization and far more outsourcing that's happening now in services and manufacturing, that you're outsourcing to smaller and smaller firms. In also globally in different countries, unionization has weakened. There are demographic pressures in that people entering the labor market are not being absorbed. These are many reasons given for high levels of informality, and it's really this informality that causes part of the problem of the missing middle. And I'll just briefly give you a sense of the point that missing middle on paper may not be missing middle in reality. I give you the example of Indonesia. Indonesia has a scheme called JKN, Jaminan Kesehatan Nasional. It's a social health insurance scheme. It is administered by an agency called BPJS Kesehatan. So BPJS Kesehatan is like the NHA of Indonesia. JKN is like the PMJ. Sorry, it's not just the PMJ. It's an expanded version of PMJ. In that, if you're part of JKN, the top is covered. The top, basically, you have mandatory contributions. If you're in the formal public sector, so if you're a person like Mr. Saxena, or if you're in the formal private sector, it's a mandatory wage deduction. So I've pulled out a wage roll from Indonesia just to show you that these are your wages, but I've taken the name of the person out, and you can see there's a mandatory contribution, just as Mr. Saxena, pays some contributions for schemes in India. In Indonesia, everybody in the formal sector has to pay a certain proportion. I'm forgetting the exact number. I think it's 3.5% or and then the employer also matches. The point is, it's really your contribution that goes into financing the system. And the bottom 40% in Indonesia, like in India, are actually covered by the central government. So the central government pays the premiums on behalf of the bottom 40%. So, like PMJ does. And the problem happens with the non-poor missing middle informal sector, in that even though on paper there is a mandate that they have to buy insurance, they have to buy this social health insurance, there is often very low take-up in the country, and that's created a problem in that they're not able to go to 100% coverage. The reasons given for not going to be able to go to 100% coverage are similar to the ones that the panelists have already talked about. There's a perception that you're not going to get sick, or that you're very healthy and you don't need insurance. There's low risk aversion. People are not as averse. There's low awareness of the benefits of health insurance. There's perception that the quality of care that they may get is low, so it's not worth prepaying, and so on and so forth. And you may have a limited impact on out-of-pocket spending. So there's a lot of sort of problems and head scratching going on as to how do we now cover this fairly large section of the non-poor informal sector that's just being left out. And not only is it being left out, the problem they're having is that of what economists call adverse selection, in that because we're counting on the non-poor informal to kind of voluntarily purchase insurance, the ones who are high risk, the ones who are sick or expect to be sick or expect to utilize, are the ones who sign up. And so that's creating challenges for financial sustainability of the system, because for the insurance to work, for risk pooling to work, as Malti pointed out, you actually need the healthy to also prepay along with the sick, and you need not everybody not to fall sick at the same time. That's the only way the health insurance can work. And so we are in Indonesia, you're having the issue of the sick non-poor informal sector signing up, and then sometimes availing the services and then not prepaying anymore. And also the point is that sometimes what's missing middle on paper is not in reality. So in Indonesia, this is sort of the version of Malti's graph for India. I'm showing it for Indonesia across deciles. You would expect that as per plan, the bottom 40% of Indonesia's population should have 100% coverage, because they're all covered on paper by the PMJ version of their scheme, which is merged with the contributory version of their scheme. But you can see that it's not that way, and there's evidence of a lot of mistargeting, and that's quite common in countries, that sometimes people from other income groups end up taking advantage of coverage that they're not entitled to. And the other point I just wanted to flag was to put in context that Indonesia merged all their schemes in 2014. So, the point that Malti was making, that, you have so many different schemes and covering different population groups with different financing mechanisms. Indonesia had that same issue. Indonesia also had several different schemes. There was a separate scheme for the civil servants, a separate scheme for the formal private sector, a separate scheme for the poor, separate scheme for Bali, separate one for another province. So in 2014, they actually merged all of them to take advantage of precisely the types of things that Malti was talking about, to pool, to be able to risk pool, to be able to strategically purchase, and more importantly, to equalize benefits, at least to attempt to equalize benefits. So it shouldn't be the case that the rich get better benefits and the poor don't get benefits. My fourth point is that compulsion and subsidization is key for universal health coverage. This is a term that was coined by Victor Fuchs, who's a philosopher. Patrick may have read his books. It's basically, the point he's making is that compulsion means you need to make it compulsory to prepay for those who can prepay. Subsidization means that the government will have to prepay on behalf of those. This is sort of now global, there's growing global evidence to show that without compulsion and subsidization, you will not get universal health coverage. You can get some gains, and there's a series of articles. Some of them are, I've put them up. I'm just going to read one or two of them. Many countries have sought to collect revenue from non-poor informal workers in exchange for health insurance coverage. None of them has managed to collect a significant amount of resources, where significance refers to the share of the contribution relative to the costs of coverage. In other paper, the results suggest limited opportunities to raise voluntary health insurance enrollment through information campaign and subsidies, and that these interventions exacerbate adverse selection. The more you advertise and try to get, you're going to end up getting the sick to join in. So your scheme loses its insurance foundation. The difficulties that developing countries today are experiencing in extending coverage to non-poor informal sector workers and in raising contributions from them points towards a long and frustrating road to universal coverage under SHI. So growing global evidence that any form of lack of compulsion to be able to get people to prepay either from taxes or through additional premiums has tended not to work. So, in conclusion, what can countries do for covering the missing middle? First, one option is you abandon social health insurance financing. So you move towards the model that Brazil did. They abandoned social health insurance, went towards a universal tax financing scheme. UK in 1948 abandoned social health insurance and introduced the NHS, the National Health Service. Norway, Denmark, Greece, Portugal, Italy, Spain. A lot of these countries had social health insurance for political reasons, for reasons related to equity. They abandoned SHI and went back to the drawing board and had really a tax finance system, universal in entitlement, no issue of missing middle there. You may have other issues. Of course, we can discuss those in another session, but at least the missing middle issue is taken care of. The second thing you can do is you extend fully subsidized social health insurance coverage to the non-poor informal sector. This is something we've discussed. Malti will remember. This is the model followed by Thailand. Thailand gave up trying to collect contributions from the non-poor informal sector, and they said anybody who doesn't have any coverage will be entitled. So anybody in the informal sector now has access to their version of PMJ. It's called the UCS scheme. They have other schemes for the private formal sector and for civil servants, but really 75% of their country is covered by PMJ type scheme. It's tax financed, no contribution, nothing. And we're also seeing Indonesia and Vietnam, they're slowly creeping up coverage from the poor to the near poor. So they're slowly trying to expand coverage of tax financing to higher and higher shares of the population, the near poor, other vulnerable groups like the people who have, meritorious citizens, people who have been in the army or things like that. They have mechanisms by which you're able to get that entitlement. So they seem to be moving towards this model where only a small proportion of the population contributes, the formal sector contributes, but the large informal sector, both poor and non-poor, are covered by tax financing. Other couple of models that come from global experience, you could universalize specific services or services in specific types of facilities. If you don't have the resources currently to cover everything for everybody, then you make choices. And Chile, for instance, has a defined guaranteed service package for everybody, regardless of insurance status. It's a minimum package. This is also a model in many Central Asian countries, ex-Soviet Union countries, Kyrgyz Republic and all. They have universal entitlement to primary care, regardless of insurance status. That's one option you can do. In Indonesia, for several years, they actually had universal access to maternal care packages. So regardless of insurance status, everybody had access to skilled birth attendants. You could deliver in the hospital without payment. And we also saw in COVID times, many countries actually extended free coverage regardless of where you were seeking care. I think I'm forgetting, but I think Indonesia did that. Patrick may know that even if you went to the private sector and you didn't have insurance coverage for COVID, the government said we will pay, and many countries implemented that kind of a model. And finally, you could just delink the contribution to entitlement, and that's kind of a hybrid model where the Russia and Kazakhstan and others use it, where you still collect contributions from the formal sector, but that contribution doesn't entitle you necessarily to care. So that they take the contributions, they add other general taxes, they've thrown in health taxes on tobacco, alcohol, put them all in a pool, and then have universal entitlement. So you're still paying, if you're well off and you're in the formal sector, you're still paying a little bit extra of your income if you're in the formal sector that goes into the pool, but there's no link between your contribution and entitlement. Entitlement is still universal. So that link between that labor force status and entitlement is delinked. And again, that removes the issue of the missing middle, which by design happens in these sorts of systems. And I'll end here just to reiterate some key takeaway messages regarding covering the missing middle. Developing countries, I'm saying using the term developing countries because, in the past, other countries like Poland and France and Austria and others didn't face this challenge, but really developing countries following the social health insurance financing model for making progress towards universal health coverage face this often insurmountable challenge of collecting contributions from the non-poor informal sector. You may be successful in getting some associations or some agencies to contribute, but really for getting to universal health coverage, this model will not work. At least it has not worked so far. This challenge is really a challenge of informality. That's why this challenge happens, and that informality makes it difficult for you to mandate collection of those contributions. One of the puzzles the world has seen in the past 2 or 3 decades is that informality has been very stagnant and declining very slowly. And actually, as a result of COVID, we have some evidence that the informality has actually even increased, and so has poverty, compounding the ability to implement such strategies. And like I said, there's growing global evidence that partial subsidization of contributions or information campaigns, etc., are not cost-effective strategies and will not make a significant dent towards universal health coverage. They can even exacerbate the problems due to adverse selection. So you really need to have a mechanism by which you make it compulsory that you have some form of coverage, like you have, I think, for the motor vehicles. Malti was telling me earlier, it's a similar logic, that you will need to make it compulsory. In some countries, you make it compulsory to purchase private health insurance. Switzerland has that model. Norway has that model. The US has that model, that it's compulsory to purchase private insurance, but other countries, it's social insurance. And generally, lessons from the globe, it's really the non-contributory model, the model which doesn't require you to pay a contribution, but which is tax financing, tend to be more successful than contributory strategies for making progress towards universal health coverage when you have such large informality. But even then, I think the point that Mr. Saxena was making, that even with this, you may just solve the financing problem. But even then, how much financing is available is important. It shouldn't just be that you switch to a tax financing model and then don't finance, then you're back to square one. So you need to have adequate tax financing, but also how that financing interacts and with service delivery and governance. You need to have the supply available. You need to have the human resources available. So it's not just an issue of how you finance these schemes, but also how do you realize those benefits in reality. That's going to be important. I'll stop here and thank you very much. Back to you, Malti.
Thank you, Dr. Ajay. You made extensive points and I think very valuable insights for all of us. I would, without spending more time, I would now like to invite Dr. Patrick Osave. We are sorry that the time has gone a little bit ahead of. We have been a bit delayed in our sessions. Dr. Patrick is Chief of Health Sector Group at the Asian Development Bank, where he provides the leadership on policy, technical, and operational matters. Since the outbreak of COVID, he has been providing leadership and guidance in implementation of ADB's $20 billion commitment to respond to COVID and $9 billion to development member companies to obtain and deploy COVID vaccines also. With his rich experience, it is my great privilege and honor to invite Dr. Patrick. Over to you, Dr. Patrick.
Thank you very much, Malti. Can you see my slide?
Yes, we can.
Okay, excellent.
It's just, I think yes, now it's full. Perfect. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the organizers for inviting me and ADB to be part of this very good, excellent meeting. I think Dr. Saxena highlighted the context very well and covered a few of the issues that I'm going to raise. And then it's always nice to listen to IJ, former colleague. We used to work very closely together, and we learned a lot from each other. I just want to share context that if you look at UHC, what we call UHC, it took Germany 120 years to have what they have today. It took Japan 70 years to have what they have today, which is a very good health coverage. It's very inexpensive, but they're really suffering because the population is growing older, and lots of chronic illnesses, and it's becoming almost unsustainable. I've had lots of conversations with the Minister of Finance of Japan, Minister of Health of Japan, and this is a big issue that they're dealing with. It took Korea 40 years to have what they have, and some people perceive Korea as one of the best health coverage in the world, but they're also beginning to struggle as the population is growing older in terms of how it could be financed and how sustainable it will be in many years to come. So if we look at PMYJ, it's amazing what has been done in 3 years. And of course, when some people talk about PMJ insurance, some people think about why can't it be like Korea? But like I've said, it took 40 years or 70 years or 120 years, and we are only at 3 years. So you can imagine, I think, just want to congratulate the team, the country, for having achieved a lot in a very short time, particularly in one of the largest public funded health insurance. It's what you've achieved, just to name a few, is a large bundle of services covering nearly 1,600 inpatient procedures. It's an end-to-end use of IT system for service provision and leveraging AI, ML for fraud control and abuse prevention. Excellent ITC system. Over 21 million hospitals admissions and over 100 million PJ cards generated within 3 years of this scheme. This is a big deal. The single most important scheme to expedite India progress towards UHC. It's the first few steps towards a long step that you're going to take. And the convergence of other insurance schemes and expansion of the beneficiary base will occur over time and will occur naturally. So I just want to share a few perspectives. And IJ has talked about some of the global status of health financing, the challenges of out-of-patient expenditure in Asia, and some way forward for UHC, and with some questions on the way forward for PMJ. So as we look at we look at the UHC and household expenditure, what I'm showing here, if on this axis is UHC essential service coverage, and when we look down on the y-axis is a population household expenditure on health, more than 10% of total household expenditure income. Now, the best you want to be is high coverage and less expenditure, and the global median is 66%, and global median here is 12.7%. So countries like Thailand, Sri Lanka, and Bhutan are high up here. And when you look at India, you're approaching coverage. The out-of-pocket is still fairly high. Now, when we look at the way that countries grow, and most countries are currently many countries are in transition. At low income, for low income countries, there are 3 categories here. First, when you look at the domestic public financing, it's fairly low. External aid is quite significant, and out-of-pocket is also quite significant. As countries grow from low income to middle income countries, you see that the domestic budget increases, the external resources shrinks, and the out-of-pocket is still fairly high. Over time, as they become upper middle income countries, The domestic resource increases, the external resources are almost gone, and out of pocket goes down. And now this is a situation that Ajay was referring to, whereby now you have high income countries, whereby now the domestic public resources are quite significant in terms of financing. And also, but there's still some out of pocket, but it's manageable because the incomes are also high. If you look at it another way, is that for low income countries, and we look at now social health insurance, private prepaid plans, out of pocket, and others, for low income countries, the social health insurance is very, very minimum. There is significant out of pocket, and then there are other resources as well. Now, for lower middle income countries, the social health insurance is increasing, the out of pocket also increases. And as you approach middle income tier, the social health insurance becomes much, much wider. And the out of pocket expenditure begins to go down significantly. And then, of course, you can see the situation in high income countries. Now, if you look at the poor countries depend on out of pocket expenditure to finance healthcare. Now, on this axis here, this out of pocket payments percent of total health expenditure, and you look at as it relates to GDP, and then on this side you have the share of government expenditure as in GDP terms, and then the share of OPPE. You see that India is still at the out of pocket still fairly high. And over time, of course, you look at the US is up here, but of course the challenge with the US, we all know, with health coverage, which is mostly private, and many players, and there isn't very strong political commitment to address health insurance in the US. Now, if you look at the next slide, Asia still has the highest poverty due to catastrophic health spending. Asia accounts for about 65% of global catastrophic health expenditure, which translates to almost more than 500 million people globally. So we still have a big issue in our region, and this movement, of course, with India being the largest country, and what PMJ is trying to do is a big step in that direction. Now, there's a negative correlation between health spending and out-of-pocket expenditure. If you look at the blue line here, this is public health expenditure as a percentage of GDP, and we look at the bars is out-of-pocket expenditure. You see that the as the public expenditure, health expenditure goes down, this significant out-of-pocket, and see where India falls. So the government expenditure is the second source of health finance in India and contributes just a third of out-of-pocket spending. Now, I just wanted to show this this slide just to summarize a few ways by which globally health some of the best practices globally on health financing. So there are about 80 countries that have earmarked budget for health. 35 countries earmark all portion of revenue from tobacco taxes. So we find this in several countries. 9 countries earmark all or a portion of revenue from alcohol sales. 10 countries earmark revenues from taxes on other goods that can negatively affect health. For example, sugar. South Africa is actually doing this very well. 2 countries earmark all or a portion of revenue from lotteries. 1 country introduced an earmark levy for foreign personal money transfers for mobile money companies. 8 countries earmark portion of transfers from national level or revenue generated at the sub-national level for health spending. 5 countries earmark general revenue for healthcare financing. And 4 countries earmark a portion of their value added tax for health service provision. So there are many sources that are being used worldwide in terms of how to generate resources for health spending. So if you look at the situation in India now, and this is what you have, the building block for PMJ, excellent initiative trying to cover 500 million citizens. The cover per family per year for hospitalization is quite generous. They are these IT enabled, cashless and paperless. It's portable. You can go to any hospital in the country, no cap in terms of family size, age. This is a great accomplishment because in many countries they're struggling with this issue. At the same reimbursement rates for public and private. So it's been 3 years and great success. So what are some of the parameters for public health insurance schemes? So I just want to raise some questions. These are I have only 3 slides left so that you have more time for questions. So I'm just going to raise a few questions that looks at what are some of the population level public health insurance indicators that you should think about and really brainstorm around some of these issues, because this is work in progress. As PHI contributed towards decreasing catastrophic health expenditure in India, has PHI contributed towards to decrease in out-of-pocket expenditure in health? Has PHI led to improvement in quality of public health and private health services? Has PHI improved access to health services in India? Has PHI catalyzed opening of new healthcare providers in Tier 2 and Tier 3 areas in the country? Has PHI contributed towards standardization of health services? Has PHI contributed towards reduction in the cost of health services through strategic purchasing? Now, when you look at program level now, this was population level. Now, when you look at program level, does PHI cover all hospitalization and diagnostic services? This is a big issue, and IJ alluded to this. Are eligible beneficiaries under PHI aware of the scheme and its benefits? He also alluded to this, and Mr. Saxena also alluded to this. Is there any change in hospitalization rate between eligible and ineligible beneficiaries? Is PHI implemented on the grounds in a cashless and paperless manner across the board? Are the hospital claims settled within the earmarked turnaround time? This is a big issue in Korea. This took many years for Korea to fix this problem. Right now in Korea, for example, all claims are paid within 30 days so that they do not want to make any hospital bankrupt. But then they have a very strong system of monitoring what's going on. If a hospital, for example, submit a claim of $10 million, and then out of nowhere, they submit a claim of $15 million, they put that claim on hold, and then they check, why is there a 50% increase this month compared to previous months? But otherwise, for everyone else, they pay, and then they monitor afterwards. As PHI successfully contributed to fraudulent activities, controlled fraudulent activities, is a PHI eligible beneficiary more satisfied in availing healthcare services compared to routine patients? Are the top private hospitals in the country empaneled and willing to be part of PHI? So with that, I'm just going to summarize a few things here. So how do we, looking forward for India and UHC, what's the best way to strengthen PMJ and to be able to accelerate progress towards this journey? First, how do you have the convergence of fragmented health scheme to create one plan scheme for all with flexible states, UTs? This is something that requires more discussion. Second, expansion of beneficiary base to cover missing middle. And there's all the speakers before me talked about this. Third, is focusing on the continuum of care and converging all diagnostic services. 4, focus on continuum of care and covering OPD services. 5, leveraging digital health stacks like EHR to improve system efficiency. 6, autonomy to public institutions, and incentivizing private healthcare providers. So I'll just, before I finish, I just want to just use a sports analogy to just illustrate what it has been able to achieve. I was born in Kenya, and Kenya is a country of runners. I saw the recent Tokyo Olympics, the winner of the men's marathon and the women's marathon were both Kenyans. And this is just not because of their athletic abilities. There's a whole science when Kenyans are running. Usually when you start a marathon, it's 42 kilometers, more or less the same amount of time they took Korea to achieve universal health coverage, 40 years. So within those 42 years, 42 kilometers, the first 5 kilometers, everybody's running and everybody's racing. The Kenyans are usually never at the top. They're usually somewhere in the middle, and they're strategizing. And then at 5 kilometers, they talk to each other. They say, how do you feel? That's the first check-in. They check in again and 10 kilometers, and then I check in another 15 kilometers. The major check-in is at 20 kilometers, when now they say, how are you feeling? Are you managing? Do you think you're gonna do? We are halfway. Do you think you're gonna do the rest? And then at 30 kilometers now, people are tired, and perhaps only about maybe 5 to 10 people at least that are racing. And then at that time now, they're saying, how are you feeling? Are you getting tired? They say that the wind is very strong, and they say, okay, I'll cover you. So if the wind is very strong, in whichever direction, one goes ahead and is blocking the wind so that the other one is resting. So they are going together, but the wind is not as strong on the second person. And then they change after about 3 kilometers, and then the other one now is blocking the wind so that the other one can rest, because they're cognizant of the big goal of Kenya getting the medals. Then at 35 kilometers, now 7 kilometers to go, they say, okay, now we are on our own, I'm gonna go for it, and they start competing with each other. It's a whole science and regular check-ins to see how you're progressing. And I'm so glad that in India, you're checking in after 3 years. You require more check-ins as you go along to see how you're doing. What is going on well? What is not going on well? And therefore, you're able to chart your way forward as a country and develop a very good system and achieve universal health coverage in years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Patrick. And it was really nice, comprehensive presentation. Both yourself and Dr. Ajay has taught us like a teacher, explain things to us at our level, maybe the people who are not health economists like you. It is now my privilege to invite Shri Amitabh Bavasti. He's presently the Secretary Health and Family Welfare and Ayurveda for Himachal Pradesh government. He's an IS officer of 2004 batch. And prior to this, he has served as Secretary in Family and Healthcare and Horticulture. He's also served as Chairman of Himachal Pradesh State Mental Authority. Over to you, Mr. Avasti. We apologize that we have got a little delayed, but we would like to hear you in full, and we would like to learn lessons from Himachal. It's a state which has achieved many firsts to its credit. Vaccination recently, full 100% was to its credit. So we would like to hear you, sir. Please, over to you. Thank you. You are on mute, sir. I think you have to unmute yourself. Can you unmute from here? Yes. Now it's fine.
Am I audible now?
Yes, we can hear you, Mr. Avasti. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. Himachal, as you said, is one of those states which has been working pretty continuously and in the right direction so far as the health sector is concerned. The recent most thing has been the performance of the state in giving first dose of vaccination to all its eligible people. That's a good thing, because the infrastructure here and the overall conceptualization of schemes and the planning is pretty good. I've heard all the experts in the field in this area We have had international exposure to the schemes. We have had the planning within the country and how it has been conceptualized. We have heard the experts' opinion, and now we are taking you down to a state wherein things have been implemented and noticed. So what we did was that when we are talking of the missing middle, we were aware of this aspect when the schemes came into being. We have this Mukhyamantri Himachal Healthcare Scheme, which we popularly call as HimCare in this state. And the salient features of this scheme are that for the missing middle, we have all those people who are not covered under Ayushman Bharat Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana into the fold of this scheme. We have also included those people who do not benefit out of the government medical reimbursement. We have so many people in the government who are working on contractual basis, who are working on outsourcing basis, who are daily wagers, and so on and so forth. They are not very highly paid people, but yes, they need health insurance perhaps more than others. Now, this is the broad coverage which we have in this state, and you can very well see that 28.57% are the Ayushman Bharat Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana beneficiaries. 31.42% are the Himachal Healthcare Scheme, which we popularly call as HimCare. 25.7% are the regular government employees who, in any case, are covered by the reimbursement schemes which are made by the state government for their benefit. Government of India sponsored ESIC schemes for the labor class account for 14%, and 2.8%, as Alokji said, as Director CGHS, is for people like us who are covered under this scheme. So this is the broad gamut under which we have coverage for the people in this hilly state of Himachal Pradesh. The features of the scheme are as follows. 5 lakh per cover per family per year, consisting of a member, 5-member family. We have so far covered 5.13 lakh families under this scheme in 2 years. We have almost distributed around 180 crores for the benefit of the people. And I mean, there's nothing which is in cash. We have 222 empaneled hospitals in the state of Himachal Pradesh, out of which 85 are private. And we haven't kept it only to Himachal. Chandigarh is an adjoining area which is fairly important for the people of Himachal Pradesh. And this scheme extends to PGI Chandigarh and Government Medical College Chandigarh also, so that anything which is not provided within the state can be provided through this scheme through PGI Chandigarh. I mean, is not a major issue. I mean, it's increasing every year. It's in an assurance mode. You know, the trust part is